Okay, so now we're recording here. There's,
Okay.
yeah.
So on your sheets, you have the definition of a memoir and autobiography and biography. And what I wrote was more of an inspirational story, a testimony. And it had elements of a biography because I was writing about my dad for the most part. And you can't write about one without mom too. And I wrote about some of my life in there. So it was sort of autobiography, but not completely. And the memoir is the closest thing it could come to. Memoir is usually a slice of life, like an experience, like Johnny Erickson Todd wrote her memoir of how she became a quad. Now she wrote beyond that too, but her first book was about becoming a quad. People have written about how a mission trip changed their lives or helped them decide what to do with their life. I recently came across a memoir that's called 1 Year in Provence, and it was about a British couple who decided to go to France, and they lived there for a year. Actually, it was more than a year, but his memoir was all about living in France. And by reading his memoir, you got a feel for France and experiences there. It introduced you to a whole nother world. And that's what a memoir does. I mean, we can invite people into our lives or into our situation and let them experience too what we have experienced. So, mine is, it's like a lot of little memoirs because each chapter is kind of like a memoir of something different. But you know what? People read it, they enjoy it. So it doesn't matter if it comes under a specific qualification as far as autobiography, biography, memoir. I was just concerned that my family read it and enjoy it and learn from it. Now, memoirs, my memoir is kind of like an info commercial where you've got the whole thing, you think, and then it's like, but wait, there's more. So when I finished the story about when my father passed away, and I thought I was done, I thought, oh, but there's more. There's the blessings that he gave, those last words, and I thought, those emails with blessings had gone out to so many people besides our family. And I thought, when I wrote the book, I thought, well, the readers have become acquainted with Dad. And, you know, not everybody has a dad who can leave blessings or last minute instructions. So I wanted to include that. So that's kind of a bonus chapter. Then when I finished that, I thought, oh, Mom is dealing with widowhood. And that's something, the things that she learned, the things she experienced would be a blessing for other people to know too. So I had another bonus chapter. So I guess it's like an info commercial where that's not all, you get more. So a memoir should have, just like a story, a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has characters, settings, conflicts or problems that you had to overcome, or even like the family who went to France, they had a lot of new things to learn. So those were challenges. But, and then emotion. I mean, when we write, when we read a book, we like to be touched in the emotions of our lives. I mean, if you just read a book and you're not touched, it doesn't have deep meaning to you. But if you can write from your emotions and share the emotion, your reader can catch on to things too. You know, when we write from the heart, our message is delivered to a heart. So a memoir must be true the way you saw it. Now, in an accident, if you're a witness at an accident, everybody sees it from a little different vantage point. And the police will check everyone who saw it to give a report on what they saw. And each person might see the same thing, but from a little different angle. And as you write your memoir, you are showing what you saw from your angle. Now, others might remember things that happened a little bit differently, and you can take that into consideration. But how you end up writing is really your story, how you saw it. What you have seen or what you have experienced is secondary to how you interpreted it. The same thing could happen to someone else in this situation, and it affected them totally different. But it's your memoir as how you were affected by it or how you interpreted it. And sometimes as you age and you look back on your life, you see things a little differently. Like, for example, in my book, I talk about the neighbor girl who was always at our house, and she gave us everything she had. I mean, head lice. She would come in, I mean, she didn't give us everything she had. She had really nothing, but she would come and play all day, go home for supper, but she often would be back to our house to eat too. And sometimes she would stay all night. And sometimes it wasn't because we invited her, or at least us kids didn't invite her. And I thought she was just a pest. That was my impression as a child. Why can't she go home and let our family just have our family life together? We always had people, so for us to be just a family was a rarity. But as I grew older and learned more things, I realized her parents lived at the tavern. And when they'd come home, they were often drunk, or there was no food in the house. Or if this girl felt threatened, she would just come back to our house, and mom and dad knew the situation. Us kids did not. So mom and dad had an open door policy for her. So that's something that changed. I mean, how I thought I saw it as a child changed as I saw it as an adult. So there can be many things like that. When you're both the narrator and the main character, you see a bigger picture. Mary DeMoth talked about her experiences as a child and her abuse. But she said as an adult, she could see the situation in knowing what else was going on in the family. And she had a different perspective. I mean, she still suffered her experience, but she had a bigger picture of what was going on. So you can ask others what they saw or they experienced, and they may add clarity or depth to the story or to what you understand. Every chapter I did, I'd call mom and read it to her and say, is this how you remember it? Is this what happened? And sometimes she gave me more backstory than what I realized from my perspective. And sometimes she said, Stella, you've got it just right. That's exactly how it was. That's exactly what I was feeling like, especially the time when, I don't know if you've read the book, but in the book of the anthology with the story of the accident. Mom, when I went through that with her, she said, Stella, that's exactly what I was feeling. So that was good. I caught that. If you are writing about someone else, what I did was I sent the chapters to the people who were involved in that particular chapter. Like with the story of the accident, I sent it to the pastor and asked them first of all, I asked if it was correct from the way they remembered it. And then I asked if they would give me permission to use their story and if they wanted their name included or if they wanted me to blur their identity. And most people they were happy to have their name in a book. One of the girls said, I don't think my name will ever be in another book. Yes, I want you to put my name in. And some I chose not to put their name in because I thought it could impact a bigger sphere of their people they knew, if they knew some of the story, particularly my brother's friend. And then I lost contact with my childhood friends. So I did change their names just slightly. And, but ask for written permission if you're going to talk about someone else in your memoir. And then this was something I learned from a writer. Betty Webb is a prolific author in our area. And she said, if you have something good to say, use the details and give honor where honor is due. But if you say something negative, try to hide the identity. And she was talking about, like if you were going, like in her story, she was using the example of going to a restaurant. If you had a bad experience at the restaurant, don't identify the restaurant, because that could have a negative impact on. But if you had a really good experience, then go ahead and say the good things about the restaurant, and they'll appreciate the good advertisement. But even if you tell the truth, but you say something negative, you could be held liable for what you said. And you could even take it, I mean, if it goes to court, you could prove the truth of what you're saying, but you still have lawyer fees to pay, so avoid it. I guess I never thought about it because I thought, well, what if a person has died? Well, there was a letter to Dear Abby, and this letter was, my sister is telling a juicy story about my mother that is not true. Should I take her? I guess she had written the story. And this lady was asking, Dear Abby, should I address this? Should I take this to court? And so even people who you think, they're dead, they're gone, well, somebody might rise up in defense of them. So if you can avoid it, just avoid it. So why bother to tell our stories? It's a lot of hard work. How many of you are grandparents? Great-grandparents, wow. That's good. And how many of you remember your grandma? Nobody? I remember
I do.
Okay. Yeah, I can't hear you, so I have to look. Or you remember, I remember my great-grandmother. And that puts me in the middle of 5 generations.
Wow.
And so I have very clear memories of my great-grandma and even my grandparents, but my grandkids will never know them unless I tell something about them that I know. And this really hit home. A couple of weeks ago, I took my adult grandson out for dinner. And I said, do you remember Grandpa Fritz? And he said, I really don't, because he lived out here. And at that point, my parents were in Wisconsin. And I thought, I know him so well, and my grandson doesn't know him. And I felt the burden of sharing, introducing him better to my dad. Of course, I'd already done that in the book, but it made me realize how fast we can lose the identity of the people who have gone before us. How many of you have seen that video clip? I think it was on Facebook, of 2 teenagers trying to make a rotary phone work, trying to make a call on this rotary phone.
Yeah.
It was very funny, but we laugh at that. But then we look at the things that we just take for granted. And the younger generation is stumbling through life, not knowing a lot of things about how life works best. And when we see, I mean, even kids who right now can't figure out if they're male or female, there's so many other things too that young people are confused about. So we need to share the truth that we know to the next generation. You know, their world is different than ours. I realize that, but their hearts are the same. They experience things like rejection, or as Mary has addressed, bullying. They experience fears. They experience insecurities. And so the heart issues that man faces hasn't changed down through the ages. So those are the things that we want to share, things that we've gone through. How can it help the next generation? You know, the cemeteries are full of stories, of wisdom points, of life lessons, and warnings that were never shared. And the next generation loses out on everything that those people had experienced or learned and never bothered to communicate. They may have missed out on lessons about how God helps us be strong when we were weak, or how he gave courage to do the right thing when we had opposition. Maybe how we hit a brick wall and didn't know where to turn or what to do next, and how God led us. How he protected us in a close call, or his timing to keep us out of danger. And, you know, we heard a lot of those stories during 911 about, if I hadn't been late to catch the bus, I would have been in the towers that day. Maybe we did, maybe they did, or maybe we did experience a tragedy. And we can share how God carried us or comforted us through those times. If we don't tell our stories, we may become like someone in an old photo that nobody remembers their name or what they lived through, what their hopes or dreams were, what the lessons were. You know, someday, unless the Lord comes soon, and I expect him to come soon, but if he doesn't, and if we end up with a tombstone, we will have our name, our birth date, a dash, and our death. And nobody knows anything about that dash, all the things that we lived through, unless we share it. David Brooks wrote, the stories we believe behind can help our offspring know that what God has done for us, he can do for them. Do you remember that song? It is no secret what God has done, what he's done for others, he can do for you. David Brooks wrote in the Atlantic, and I'll read his quote: "The shift from bigger, interconnected and extended families to smaller, detached ones has left Americans lonelier, with fewer role models, weaker support networks to help them in times of need. Sharing family stories gives a sense of belonging. It may provide models and a supportive help and hope when they go through similar things. But the main reason that we should share our stories is because the Bible tells us to. And I never realized how many times in scripture we are told, tell your story, until I was struggling writing my papers when I was first started. And I thought, this is too hard. And I'd put it up. And then I'd hear a message, tell your story. And, you know, from Passover, they have, the kids have to ask 4 questions. The youngest child asks 4 questions, and that gives the parents opportunity to share the Passover story. You know, Joshua set up those memorial stones by the river Jordan after they crossed over, so that when your kids ask, what are these for? You can tell them the stories. But throughout the Psalms especially, David is talking about tell your story, So that's, Jesus wants us to tell our stories, because so often we can tell something about God, how he helped us through our stories. And Jesus was the master storyteller. And even pastors today, I don't know what your pastor's like, but sometimes I get lost in the doctrine of a message. But when he stops and says, and this is a story, it's like the whole congregation's ears perk up, because everybody likes stories. And you know, sometimes you can't remember all the points of a sermon, but it's easier to remember a story and the point of the story. So if we put our memories in story form, they're much more inviting and memorable. Let's see. Well, we have a lot of excuses for not writing our stories. First, it's too hard, and that was my major excuse. I kept putting it up, but the Lord would not let me stop. I don't have time. Well, we've heard of a lot of authors who get up at 4 a.m. to write before they go to work. I have nothing important to write. My life was just very ordinary. Well, do you remember the stories of Waltons, the Waltons on the mountain? Most of their stories were just very normal things that happened in their lives on the farm during that time period. And you wouldn't think there was much to write about, but there's a whole TV series about daily living in that situation. And what is daily living to us will be history to someone else. And what we talk about in our stories about daily living will be an era that the next generation will know nothing about. We read historical things, and it's like, that's a different era, but that was their everyday experience. I can show you a book. This was written by a lady in our church. She's now with the Lord, but she remembered her grandma, Susan, and she went back to New York and did a lot of research. And my goodness, she told some things that, I mean, she made this like a novel, but she had done so much research. She has a bibliography in her book. She has a glossary in her book, because some of the things they talked about, we wouldn't. How do you cook on a spider? Do you know what a spider is? It's a little 3-legged pot that they would put over a fire. I mean, things that we would not know, but in that day, everybody knew what a spider was. And she's got a whole glossary of things that words she uses in her book that are lost words to us, or we've lost the meanings of them. Some of them we know, like a bucket brigade, or a sawhorse, or well, there's a whole bunch of things, but she captured history when she was doing her book. And even she has an interesting story, because they lived with the Indians, but that was just everyday stuff to them. But to us, it's a picture into how life was at that time. Well, someday people will ask about how is life in pre-COVID days. We hope we find out again, don't we?
Right.
Okay. Oh, you might think, well, nobody's interested in what I'd have to say. I'm going to address that later. Or I can't remember all those things. I have a poor memory from back when. Well, I'm going to address that too. Or we can say, I've made mistakes in life and I really don't want other people to know about it. Well, you're still here, and failure is not fatal. There's still time for healing, forgiveness, and for a new path. And someone said, we all mess up. And if you come through as a perfect character in your memoir, It will be unbelievable because we're just not perfect. And one of the ladies who read my book came up to me afterwards and she said, Stella, thank you for sharing about your brother. She said, we all have skeletons in our closet, but you were open and helped us know that we're not alone. So that was the hardest chapter to write, but it's the one that has touched people that I've heard about touching people the more than any other chapter, although a lot of things have touched people. But we sometimes have to write for ourselves before we can write for others about those mistakes in our life. A lot of people who are dealing with PTSD are instructed to write. And one of the ladies in one of my workshops had gone through a nasty divorce. And her counselor had told her, write. Get all that junk that's inside of you, all those open wounds, all of those hurts, just put it down on paper. And that was part of her therapy. And she said it was hard to do, but she said, I got all that gunk out of me and onto a paper. And then her counselor had her tear it up. And she said, now I wish I had it to remember. But she said at the time, I was writing so hard. She said, I broke a lot of pencil leads because I was so intense in what I was writing. But if you get past that and you can find a redeeming value for sharing that part of your life, then you have a message that will touch other lives, because many have gone through hard things. And if you are writing about something like a difficult past, don't take your reader into the pit with you without showing them how to get out of the pit. Well, you can't show them how to get out of the pit unless you have gotten out of the pit. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Mary DeMuth shared about her childhood of being abused. And because she had been there, she experienced it and went through the healing process, she can share that now. And she said, I'm no longer a victim, I'm an overcomer. And then now she has a ministry to help a lot of people who have gone through that experience. I guess before the Me Too movement, I was told that 1 in 4 people have experienced abuse. And that's just unbelievable, but it's so common. So let's see. Stories. Oh, she also said to pray to see the offender through God's eyes. And
Could you repeat that?
Pardon?
Could you repeat that, Stella?
Sure. Mary said, pray that you see the offender through God's eyes. Okay, stories of rejection, the death of a loved one, surviving abuse, or an illness, or living with the results of an accident like Johnny Erickson Tada. These stories are difficult to share, but they touch people because those things surface in many lives. And what we have survived, we can help others survive. We can show people that there's victory, there's healing, because we've gone through that experience and come out of it, or learn to deal with the effects of it. This is a side note, but something I learned is prisoners of war, they found, who knew family history or knew God's word were more likely to survive their experience as a prisoner of war than those who did not. So we have no idea what our stories might mean to someone. Your story may give hope or direction to someone you may never meet. They might be just the words someone needs to hear. And you might think, nobody's interested in my story. Nobody's interested in what I have to say. Well, maybe they aren't right now, but maybe after we are gone, they will be. And one of the ladies who came to my workshop came up to me and she said, that is so true. She said, my mother filled out one of these booklets like this when I was a young mother. This is the one my mom filled out, and it just has questions. And anyway, Ruth Ann's mother had filled that out and gave it to Ruth Ann. And Ruth Ann was a young mother at the time, and she thought, I'm too busy. So she laid it aside. But then she's retired now, and she came up to me and she said, I found that booklet that my mother had filled out. And she said, that is such a treasure to me. I never looked at it until they were downsizing, and she found that. And she said, I am so glad she did that. I learned so much about my mom that she really didn't have time to think about when she was raising her family. So let's see. So what we write may not change the world, but it might change somebody's world, or maybe somebody's eternity. So who are we writing about or for? I used to work in a retirement home, and it was interesting to see so many of the older people are so lonely. And their main focus is, when is dinner? What are we going to have to eat next? Or nobody came to see me. And even though somebody had, they often forget those things. But if you have the opportunity to visit older people, not just in a nursing home, but anyone who's older, talk to them about their history, what they lived through. They've lived through a history that we only read about in history books. But ask them, how did your family survive during like World War II? I mean, most of those people are gone now, but not every woman became Rosie the Riveter. But we read about that in the history books. Not every man went to war. So how did these things in history affect your family? We all have memories of 9/11, and it affected families in many different ways. And if you read the history books, okay, we came together as a nation, but was your family affected? Did you go into the military because of it? There's a whole bunch of things that could have affected us all differently. Where were you when JFK was killed? How did that affect you? And someday people will say, tell me about when there was that COVID epidemic. And to us, it's just normal living now, but record it, because someday that will be history if the Lord tarries. So we think, oh, it's just normal living. Well, record how it's affected you. We are shaped in part by our past without realizing the effect on us, their effect on us. Without my great-grandpa Groves making one suggestion to my dad, life would have been totally different for the whole McDowell family. And I tell people you have to read the book to find out what that one statement was. But we have no idea how even one statement that we make can affect other people. Mom's decision to trust Jesus as her savior affected 4 generations, plus others. And it's like one move on a chessboard. You make one move and it can change everything. Well, Mom's decision to trust Jesus changed everything. Mom passed away this past summer, and the effect of Mom's decision, my goodness, the day after her funeral, we had just celebrated her 100th birthday in June, and she passed away on July 6th. And I mean, she had company. She had 9 people around the table on 4th of July. And she had called great-grandchildren to come and get the sparklers that someone gave her for her 100th birthday, because she thought they would enjoy the sparklers. But so she lived fully right up to the last 30 hours of her life. But people had just been coming for her birthday, so they couldn't come again for the funeral. So they did it live on the church did it live on Facebook. And by the next day, there were 2,500 views of her memorial service. Her life had impacted so many people around the world, actually. So we don't know how our one decision to say yes to Jesus can impact people beyond our wildest imagination. Now Mom was pretty unique, but so somebody in your past made the decision to cross the ocean and come to America, or to cross the border and come into America. But because of that one decision, you live here. Your life would be totally different if they hadn't made that one decision. So your decisions today can affect generations to come. And maybe even what you record or write will affect generations to come. Okay, another group of people we might write about or for is kids. How many of you used to have a baby book that you would write in for your kids? Well, I did. My first one had half of his book filled, and my last child has maybe the first page. But we can write for our children, maybe a birthday letter, the milestones that they've had for the year, or answers to prayer they've seen, or some events, activities they were in, just something about their year. And you don't always have to give it to them for their birthday. You could give it to them, but save a copy for when they're older, and they will have a journal of some of their early life. Another thing you can do is, some of you raised your hand that you're grandparents, and some of us have grandma days with our grandkids. We could write a journal of what we did on grandma days, or we could take a picture of us working with the kids on our special times with them, or have the kids draw a picture or write a little blurb about what we did today at grandma's house, and then save those things. And as older teens, a lot of times they drift away because of their busyness in school and friends and starting their life journeys independently. But if you can bring out that journal of what you and your grandchild did together, it's like reconnecting that sense of bonding, that I remember those times, and so often they get blurred in our memories. But if they see those pictures or stories of those times, a lot of that will come back. I remember that day. And it's a way to reconnect with your generations, your grandkids, in their older, as they age. Family stories give us a sense of identity, of our roots and our belongings. And then another thing, we had a young father who died in our church. And at the funeral, so many people got up and talked about him, the friendships they had with him, the funny things they did. And we had a sense of, they gave us a pretty broad picture of who this man was. And if that had been recorded for his son, who was too young to remember all those things, as that son ages and wonders about his dad, if he had that recording, or even the stories that were written, if each of those people, that's already in the past. But if that happens again, if those people write down those memories of the dad, then that child would have a bigger picture, a better picture of what his dad was like. What a treasure that would be for him. So some of our writing is for our own selves. And we talked about writing our memoirs. Some of it is for therapeutic healing. Some of it is because we journal, we do prayer journals, we do devotions, writing out things, things that are part of our life. So often we're so busy, we live from one activity to the next, but writing invites us to reflect on our life. And in looking back, we can see how God orchestrated our lives. I was amazed. I mean, I knew my parents' story, but when I looked back on the bigger picture and put all the different pieces together, it's like, wow, God orchestrated their lives in ways that we didn't understand. When one thing happened and then years later another thing, and how all those things fit together, it was amazing. So another thing is, one of the ladies who came to my workshop, she ended up writing this. And she was a music therapist, and her life was pretty much doing therapy with special needs people or stroke victims. And she composed a lot of songs, and some of the reasons to use those songs and some of the ways to use them in therapy. And she wanted to preserve all that work she had done. So this is not her memoir, but it's definitely a big part of her life. So she just published that a year ago, December. So that was exciting to see. She had the courage to start doing something, and that's what she did. Okay, there are ways to preserve our stories, even if we think we can't write. One is doing interviews with a parent. Kim was at one of my early workshops, and she said, I'm going to meet with my mom, and I'm going to start writing down I'm asking her questions, and I'm going to write down what she says. Well, she started doing that every Friday, and then her mom got pancreatic cancer. So she took her video or her tape recorder, I'm not sure which, but when she went to visit her mom, instead of taking time to write everything, she just did question after question. And by the time her mom could no longer communicate, Kim had a lot of information, and she said, Stella, thank you so much for telling me just to get started, just to start doing something. She said, I would not have this information if I hadn't started. So then I'm going to try something really scary right now. I'm going to try to switch this camera so you can see. Let's see if it works. There, it worked.
You did it.
You have no idea what a miracle this is. If you knew my tech ability, you'd say, yes, it's a miracle. One of the girls, it was at SoCal, talked about a story in a jar. And she said she decorated a jar and put some questions in it, gave it to her grandma for Christmas, and then had her grandma pull out a slip of paper and write the answer to that question. So for Christmas, then she got all these questions answered and into a notebook, and then Robin was able to write her story. So this is called Story in a Jar, and that's one way to have people share their story. Just write the questions you want answers to in a jar and make it a fun thing. So that's one way. Another way I already alluded to is this story in a book, or questions in a book, and just a little space to fill in the answers to these questions. And this is the one my mom did years ago. And it's been fun to look at it. I didn't know she had this until after she was gone and we were going through stuff. It would have really helped me when I wrote the book though. Now this is one that my daughter-in-law gave to her husband, and look at it. Nothing is written. So we can either get these books and do nothing with them, or fill it in and preserve those memories. There's all kinds of these things online. But as much as we have good intentions, sometimes it doesn't get done. So my thing is, start, whatever you do, start, even if it's small, like just a little answer to a question. This is one way to start preserving your memories. If you think, if you think you can't really write much, but at least you get something down. This is another way my daughter does, and she has a photo book. I don't know if you can see it, it doesn't really fit too well on the screen, but with the pictures, and there's a little space to write just a little bit. And so they've got a record of the things they've done. So they've got a picture and just a little bit of writing, but it's a way of preserving their stories. This is my grandson. He was a roller skater, and anyway, it's one of their awards. So that's another way to preserve history or preserve your stories without doing a lot of writing. And then there's always Shutterfly. No, yeah, I think that's what it's called. And let's see, I've got so many notes here. There's Shutterfly, and there's scrapbooks, photo book albums that you can make. That was really popular to do. And journaling Bibles. Oh, one thing about writing in a Bible or anything, kids are not taught cursive writing anymore. So if you're planning for them to read something you write, we appreciate our parents' handwriting. Kids today will not be able to read it. Mm-hmm. Okay, something else. Oh, yes. This is something that I did during COVID. My mom said, you wrote about your dad, now write about my mom's family, my mom. And I thought, Mom, I don't know too much about Grandma. And she said, well, I'll help you. So she gave me a lot of information. This is my grandmother. She had become a cripple when she was 7 years old. So I titled it a crutch for Grandma, because she had to lean first on a crutch. But then when she came to know the Lord, she leaned on the Lord as a crutch. And it's, she knew the value of a crutch. She would not have survived working on the farm, raising 7 kids without the crutch. And then I put a table of contents in it. I put some markers in so I wouldn't have to page through these things. Then I took the things that I learned from my mom, and I made a story. I had all of my cousins. I have older cousins on this side. I asked all of them to share their memories. So each of the cousins who responded, I put their memories in here. And then I wrote the story based on what I knew, what Mom told me, and what my cousins' memories were. And then I had family pictures that I was able to copy. This is really valuable because there's no way to get copies of all these old pictures, but to put it in a book was available for everyone. Let's see, I found that I had more pictures. I had done this a couple times trying to see what would work, and I had even more pictures in another form that I had done. But this is the store in the house. But if you really look at these old pictures, you learn a lot. I learned, I mean, there's a hitching post in front of the store. You learn a lot about what was going on. So if you find those old pictures, don't just glance at them. There's a lot of information in those. This one, you can see, this is my grandmother, and you can almost see the pain on her face because she was so sickly. Let's see, then I've got pictures of the houses they lived in. Anyway, so pay attention to those pictures that you find of the family. Then you can learn a lot. I learned that I did not find any posed pictures of grandma with her crutch. So that was interesting. She always got rid of her crutch. She was going to be having a picture taken. So it wasn't until later that we found, it was hard to find a picture of her with her crutch. Then I did some genealogy, and not a lot, but just enough to know where we came from. And there was a site I used called geni.com. And you could, I just Googled my grandfather's name, and then it's like his father's name and his mother's name. Then I could keep following back on that. And I went back to the 12th century for one of the relatives. And so I learned quite a bit about where we came from, and some of my ancestors. One was a ship captain, and you learn some things from that. I could tell, it tells often where they were born and where they died. So that way I was able to tell who came to America and when. If they were born in one place and died here. Then for all of my mom's siblings, I had their name, and I had a place where each of my cousins could write their memories of their aunts and uncles. So that's what I did over COVID. And then I had this, where do I fit into this family? So that whoever got this book could add their personal, like which child of the 7 they were from, and their children's names, whatever they wanted to write. So that's one way you can do it. Oh, I did this at Office Max, and this one cost less than $10 to do. The price will be determined by how many pages are in a book, whether you have colored pictures or not, the kind of a binding you want, the quality of paper you want, and the cover, if you want it paper or some laminated, however you want it, but you pay for it by the number of pages and the quality of paper that you use. So that's one way to preserve your stories without going through Amazon or Kindle Direct, I mean. And I used a comb binding because I thought others might want to add more pages into their book. My cousins or my nieces and nephews. So that's one thing you can do for preserving stories. Are there any questions about this? Okay.
Stella. Stella, I do have one question. When you bring your documents to Office Max, let's say, are you there? I lost you visually.
Nope. I'm here.
Okay. when you're including photos, let's say, do you like tape them to the document where you want them and then they photocopy it and then put it in the bound,
No.
bound spine?
I did it at home with my printer. I scanned the pictures and then I put them into the document.
So when you say you put them into the document, so when you're on Word and you insert the photo in your document, and then you basically send your whole manuscript or your whole series of documents to Office Max through an email?
I did.
Oh, that's how you do it. Okay, I just had to get a visual on that.
Okay, and then you do your covers separately, and then you have to watch the formatting too. They did one for me, and they got the formatting all wrong, and I had sent it incorrectly. So I took it back, and they could see how they had done it wrong, and they just fixed it. They did a repeat, and didn't charge me for it.
Okay, can you turn on your camera, your Zoom camera?
Let's see. Yes, I can. Oh, but you know what? I've got my other camera turned on. Can I have a few more things to show you.
yeah. Go right ahead.
Okay. This is another way of preserving your memories. And this looks like the same thing, and it pretty much is, except this is a collection of poems and short stories that my aunts and uncles did. They had they didn't have much, but they could write stories and poems to each other. So for Christmas, they often got a poem with a little gift, like a poem about the piece of furniture, the china piece of furniture that would go under the bed. Now, for those of you who are older or from the country, you might know what that is.
The chamber pot.
That's right. So I learned a lot about my family just from the little stories they wrote, and they did a lot of jokes on each other. And so those are in here. So I learned a lot about it. Oh, and then they put pictures. No, no, that's a different one. Okay. So anyway, that's one, just preserving all those poems that they did. Then this one is one my aunts had done. And this is, oh, that shiny. That's not, okay. That's a picture of DeSoto. You can see the river in the background. They're on top of the hill. But anyway, this is one that my aunts had done. And they had some pictures of the family. And they had some stories. I wish they'd had more. But I think they wrote what they knew, and that's what all you can do. But so it goes back quite a ways, and we learned some things about the family from the past. Then they had a picture of each of the kids who got married. They had 13 who survived to adulthood, and not all of them got married. There were 7 who never, or 5 who never married, but they had a picture of the weddings of each one. And then we have some colored pictures of my 5 aunts who never married. And so they called it the McDowell Heritage. And this was written by my aunts. So that was good too for a resource. I guess because they had this, I learned to appreciate saving memories. So you don't know what you might do that would help another person. I think it's important to save the memories of the family. Okay, now I think that's all the props I was going to show you for that. I'm going to walk away for a minute and come back and see if I can get this camera to work now. Or oh, let's try this. Where's that picture of the camera? Here it is. Oh, I'm back.
There she is.
Okay. So does that give you some ideas?
Yes.
Okay. Another way of saving family stories, one lady is working on a recipe book. She is from a Mexican family and she has 9 siblings. And she said, we're losing some of our heritage. So she wants to have everybody in all of her siblings share their Mexican recipes and other recipes. But then she's going to have a blurb. I mean, it will be like each of her siblings has a section in this book with the recipes they want to share. And then they'll write something about each of the family members. So let's see. We talked about self-publishing, Kindle Direct, and you people know about that because you have a great leader. And Mary has talked about Kindle Direct with you. One thing that I learned, you can get the free ISBN from Kindle Direct, or you can buy your own. And I bought my own. That was recommended to me. And I learned that if you have your own ISBN and you want to change your publisher to Ingram, you can. But if Kindle Direct has bought your ISBN, then they basically own it. You don't have the right to move it to another publisher. So that's something to keep in mind if you think something will go further than Kindle. I thought at one time I tried to put it on Ingram, and the technology for formatting was so beyond me. I thought, oh, I'm not going to do it. But I have the ability to do it because I bought my own ISBN. Okay, the vanity prices are still in business. This lady who wrote this book did it with a vanity press, and she had to buy so many copies of it. Nowadays, they kind of hide the fact that they're more like a vanity press, and they will charge you a lot of money just to help you get started. I started with one, and they were charging, you could buy a $1,000, $2,000, or $3,000 package. And this is just when I thought I was going to have it for the family and a few of the church people. And so I bought the $2,000 package. And then they said, well, you're going to need an editor, and that's so much more money. And then you're going to need a cover, and that's even more money. And I said, this is just going to be for the family and a few church people. I can't afford to keep adding money to this. And I knew I needed an editor. So I broke the contract. I got $1,000 back, and they kept $1,000. And you have to do that within a certain time frame. Otherwise, the longer you wait, the less you get back. But I found my own editor, and it worked out fine for me. I have a friend who has spent $16,000 to get his book published. So it can be very expensive. And then there's some that promise you everything, like, we'll help you and we'll get your book into the bookstores. Well, that does not happen. When you go to the library and you see how many books there are, if you go to a bookstore, there's not nearly as many books. So even seasoned authors sometimes have a hard time getting their books on a bookshelf. That space in a bookshelf is very, very hard to get. So if you have an in with a bookstore, you might be able to. I have 2 bookstores that have my book. So, but it's because I know them. One is the local bookstore, and it's not, when it was owned by Lifeway, they would not take self-published books, but Lifeway went out of business in our area, and this guy has a private bookstore, so he will take self-published books. Not everything, but he might take them. Okay, the other idea is to hire a ghostwriter. That's expensive. And then if you think you're going to have a traditional publisher, it's very hard. You need to follow the guidelines. Well, we know, I was at the airport once and a lady and I were talking and she said, well, I wrote a story. She said, I thought I'd send it in and have them publish it. And I thought, you have no idea. You don't just send in a story you've written. You have no idea of the process you have to go through to even have a traditional publisher look at you. And then they might reject you, even though it's a really good book, because maybe they just published something very similar. Or maybe what you have, they don't feel is something that would be bought by the general public at this time. Or maybe they don't see that you can have a marketing platform. There's a lot of reasons why they wouldn't. Oh, one other thing about these programs that say will help you get your book into bookstores, check with the Better Business Bureau with that. I Google those companies. I've had lots of people offers in my mailbox about, we will do the marketing for you and we will, we'll charge so much for every book we sell for you. A lot of that is not, there's a lot of scams with that kind of business too. Okay, stirring up memories. Oh my goodness. Make lists. These people who think they have a poor memory, they can't remember everything to write, make a list. And I think I wrote down some of that for you. Make a list of everything you can remember, family members, list events that changed you positively or negatively. Use, was there a shift in your beliefs? When did faith in the Lord Jesus become personal for you? List watershed moments, words that were spoken to you that impacted your life. Then write down news that shocked you, good and bad, like when you heard about an accident or when you found out you were going to be a grandma or grandpa. Some of those are good things that surprised you, some not so good. But those are often watershed moments or big events in your life. You can go to family reunions and swap stories. It's so often when you start saying one story, someone else will remember, oh, do you remember this too? And then you get a lot of ideas of things that you may have forgotten about, but somebody else remembers. Then look at old photos. And I told you to look for hints in the photos to learn about the people. Visit old hangouts. And most of the time, your hangouts have gotten smaller through the years. Going to my grandparents' house, my goodness, it used to be so big and now it is so small. However, going to the woods we used to climb in, that has grown. The trees are much bigger. And then you organize your memories by making a timeline. What did I do with my timeline? I'm going to switch to PowerPoint. No, I think I'll show it to you this way first. This I learned from Robin in SoCal, so maybe Mary has already showed you about doing this, making a timeline of the events. What? Well, this is a timeline, and you start out with things, you put the positive things above the line, negative things below the line. So, if I can find that. So this is the way my book started. And before it was a book, it was just a timeline. It wasn't actually a timeline because I didn't know about this, but when I look back, okay, there was a fire. So that was a negative, but it drew the family very close. So that's a positive. Then there were some negative things. Then my dad met my mom, but she sent him a Dear John letter. So that was a big negative. And then 5 years passed. And then something happened in June. To mom, it was very negative. To dad, it was very positive. And she was engaged. Well, anyway, that's a story. But she was she was jilted. And at the same day that she was jilted, Dad wrote a letter to her. So that's how they reconnected. So then there were some positive experiences with Mom and Dad. Then they got married. So their wedding was a real big positive, but it was a real big negative because Dad's family rejected Mom because they didn't want anyone to disturb their little close-knit family. They didn't think that somebody else should come into the family. So that was a big rejection for Mom. And I write about that. A lot of rejection. And then all of a sudden we had a big positive. And that's when I was born. But the reason it was so positive is because the family who had rejected Mom loved babies. And because of Mom, they again had a baby in the family. And that was the start of a whole new relationship. So anyway, that's how you do a timeline. The negatives below, the positives above. And then when you look for a story to write about, you look at those things, and maybe there was a lesson in one of those parts of the timeline. Now this just has a little part of the timeline for me to show you. But when you look at your timeline, you say, that was a turning point in my life. That's important. Or some of these little things that really, it happened, but my goodness, you can't write everything that happened. So look for where there's a story to tell. Maybe where you learned something about God, maybe something that impacted your life, something where you learned a lesson. So use your timeline to find the short stories. Okay, now I'll go back to tech. Let's do this. Okay, camera. Okay, now, I kind of went down. Okay, I'm going to see. Do you see anything?
We see you.
Uh-oh. Okay. Well, let's see. This is PowerPoint. Let's see if I can do it this way.
The green bottom button says share screen. At the
Oh,
bottom of-
thank you. Thank you. That's it. Okay. Let's see. There we go. Well, can you see that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. This is the anatomy of a story. I'm a nurse, so I think in terms of, you have a body, but you have all those systems of a body that make up the body. So the story is like that. It's a story, but it has many different parts to it. It has characters, scene, a problem or conflict. It has a plot or a message. So your story needs all of those, just like your body needs all of the systems of the body to be a well-functioning story. So then, I think I put that on your outline. Then we're going to make snowflakes or spiders. Let's see. I'm not going to talk about this one. I'm going to go to this. So this is what at the end of yours, I'm asking you to use a snowflake, make a timeline of when you accepted Jesus and all the things that led up to it, maybe, and it will be a short timeline probably. And then you make a snowflake or a spider, or some people call it a story map. So this is how I did mine for my salvation story. I have 4, 11, alone, rapture, fear, dust rag. Let's see. Then I added more to it. And then by doing it this way, before you just start out in your narrative, you write and then you think, oh, I should have put that in. And then you have to start over in your narrative again. If you make your spider and start brainstorming all the things that you want in this particular story and write it out, then you can see at a glance what you want to include. And it's easier to put all the pieces together and write your narrative without writing half of it and realizing, oh, I should have done it, added something early. So this is my salvation story. And I could write it out as a narrative just using this. When I was told that when I was 4, I accepted Jesus. I didn't remember that, but that's what I was told. When I was 11, I was sent to my room when everybody else could go outside and play, because I hadn't cleaned the room like I was supposed to. So I had to go back up to my room. I was alone in the upstairs bedroom, dusting. And all of a sudden it got quiet. Everybody was, our house always had activity, but it was super quiet. Nobody was at home. And outside, there was no one I could see from the window. And I thought the rapture's happened and I've been left behind. I thought, well, I was told I accepted Christ and I knew I loved Jesus, but I thought, what if it didn't count? What if I really hadn't done that? And so right then and there, I decided, I had a lot of fear right then, being alone, left alone. And so I decided I'm going to make sure. So right there, I took that dust rag and I knew that my sin was, even my good things were like a filthy rag. So much more was my sin. And I knew I was a sinner. After all, I was being punished. I was in the room. But right then, I prayed and asked Jesus, I don't know if I did this before or not, but I want to make sure that I have told you that I want you to be my savior. And I want my sins, I know, are like this filthy dust rag I have in my hand. And I thank you for dying on the cross, Lord Jesus, for paying this debt of my sin. And I receive you as my savior if I've never done it before. And I look back on this day when I was 11 as the time I knew for sure I accepted Christ. So that's how I can tell my testimony in a short way, but it helped me kind of remember all the things that should go into it. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, that's
That's
so
nice.
good. And if someone asked if they could have prints of these, I don't know if you can send those to, or like send the document in the Facebook bookbinder page and send it or attach it. As a file.
Maybe Mary, you and I can talk about how to do that later.
Okay.
So,
Perfect.
okay. So I think that's all I have to do for my PowerPoint. So now I have to get out of this.
I think you hit the green here.
Stella, I have a
Ta-da.
question for you.
We see
I'm
you.
back.
You're
I
back.
am. Okay. Okay. So
There's a
after
question.
you,
Oh, Stella, are
Go
you
ahead.
looking for questions yet, or?
sure.
Just a quick one, when you, in the section of anatomy of a story. number
Priya,
six.
could you come and speak into them
Oh, yeah.
so she can hear you?
Yeah, I can help.
Okay, number 6 on anatomy of a story is POV. Can you expand that?
Did you
Number
repeat
one.
that?
Okay.
Mary?
Prisoners of war.
Never mind, the question got answered.
What was the
She didn't know what POV meant.
POD.
No, she didn't know what POV meant.
Oh, point of view.
Right.
question? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so after you get your snowflake, you can write your narrative. And what you want to do is Your first draft is you telling yourself the story with a pen, and you write as fast as you can. Go at 80 miles per hour. Don't worry about grammar or spelling. Just get the story down. Write what happened, what you felt, what others did, what happened next, and then what happened next after that, and what happened next. And then you get done with that and you read what you wrote, and you will see a message, maybe a theme. And I went through that kind of fast, but it's just writing it out fast without paying attention to detail. Then after you write, you might see a theme or a message that would be of value to another person. And as far as a value, maybe it's just entertaining. You know, we need entertainment too. So you read what you wrote, you find a message, and maybe it reveals something about God. Maybe God answered a prayer, a desperate prayer, maybe how God brought you through a tough time. Maybe there were lessons that you could share within that story. So you write that out and do it for a short story. I mean, don't do your whole life like that. Just do one small section. Otherwise it'll be so daunting to do the whole thing. But you write that out and then you celebrate because you've done a lot. And you read it out loud and you might cry because when you were writing, your mind was working, you were seeing things, you were feeling things, and you were just writing as fast as you could. So you couldn't capture all of that. So now you go back to that and you bring your story to life. And you go like 20 miles an hour. You go back and sense the things you were going through in that part of the memoir that you were writing. You capture more details. You stop and think about what else you were seeing or where you were. I mean, describe a little bit of the scene maybe. Let's see. You just capture more detail. And as far as emotion too, you step back into the emotions of that time period that you were dealing with. And some of that is very hard to do. I have a friend who wrote, well, let's see. It's hard to do that, but you're stepping back into the experience as you experienced it. And some of that is really fun because you've got fun things you're reliving, but some things are very difficult. And some people have said they can only write like a friend who's gone through a lot of things like Mary did. She said, you can only write a little bit and then you have to back away and rethink things and just kind of adjust before you can go any further into that memory. And one of my friends wrote a book. Here it is. This was his book. He and his wife lost 2 babies, and not at the same time, but he became a pastor, and then now he's a counselor. And he wrote the story about when they lost their babies. And he has a heart for people. So he said the hardest thing about writing was stepping back into those times emotionally to share his heart. But he said he had to do that because the people he was writing to and for were going through these same things. And he had to connect with, it was a way of connecting because it was from his heart to their heart. So sometimes we have to write things that are really tough that we've gone through. But he now is on his 3rd book, and he has his ministry of counseling he's doing more and more. And anyway, that's another story. Okay.
The author's
So
name, Stella, of that book? I'm sorry.
the name of it?
What was the author's
It's
name
called
again?
A Little White Casket
By, what's his name?
by Gary Hall.
Gary Howell.
Mhm. And his book is not just about his experience, but about therapy, how he helps people going through hard times. And it's about grieving. And, people grieve more than the loss of a person. There's a grieving of many kinds of losses that we deal with. His wife was also a victim of sexual abuse, and he talks about that in here too. Let's see. So to bring your story to life, you want to have a hook. You don't just say, I was born on a snowy night in February. I mean, how much does that draw you in? Versus this is the hook. I mean, this is one of our pastors. This is his beginning. He would say, I was so small when I was born that I fit in my grandfather's cigar box, and nobody thought I would live. Now that makes you kind of want to know more. Which story would draw you in more? That's what a hook does. It kind of raises more questions, gives you a sense of, I want to know more about this. If you say, I was born in such and such a year in such and such a town, it's like, well, everybody was born someplace. But give a reason, I mean, something unique about that if you're going to start with that as your beginning. And you don't have to start with when you were born. You can start at a later time when there was something happening. And if you need to talk about when you were born, you can go back to that. But start with something that will intrigue the reader to want to know more. And then we hear, show, don't just tell. And by showing, I'm going to give you an example of that. Instead of saying, the recovery was miraculous, you could say, I saw the doctor walking down the hall and my heart beat faster. What would the answer be? Would the cancer be gone? You know, that kind of a thing. It kind of helps you see what's going on. Oh, and then praying, you know, telling more than just the recovery was miraculous. So you give a little more detail. Then you also can use dialogue to bring your story to life. And you say, well, I don't remember the conversation from years back. Well, you can often remember the sense of the conversation. For instance, when I talked about how my dad talked about how to be saved to my mom, I wasn't there. It was before they were married. But I know what she would have said. I know what his situation was. So I could reenact that conversation because I was capturing the essence of what she would have been saying. And then there are some things, and then you can write in your, at the beginning that some of this conversation is not exact, but the conversation is capturing the essence of what was communicated. Or then some words that you know are engrafted in your memory, and you can use those words. And then another thing is eliminate the inactive verbs. Instead of saying she was walking, say she walked, or she was sitting, say she sat. I mean, just change that was something to what they did, make it direct, and save all those inactive things. Now, if you are slowing down your story and you want to say something like, you know, somebody's dealing with a decision and they're vacillating between decisions, you could say something like she was meandering in the garden. That's, you're slowing the story down because she is slowing down as she is meandering instead of she just walked through the garden. Do you see what I mean? Okay, then another thing is you trim every sentence, and some people say every word has to move the story. Do you have a question? It's kind of like an accordion. First, we go through and we get all the details we can think of, like expanding an accordion. And then at the end, we're bringing it together and we're eliminating all the things. But in opening all of those details, you get a sense, it draws your emotions into it. You get a sense of what's important, but then you eliminate a lot of things when you trim, but you're still condensing. That's the better word to say. And then your closure, your last words will linger. So your first words, the hook is important and your closure is important. Your hook gets them into the story, your closure helps them keep thinking, or you know, it's like a good ending. It's like it brings it all together and it makes memorable last words. And then in your closure, you want to make sure that by that time, all the questions you've raised in your book are answered, or that you are pretty sure you know what happened at the end, even if you don't write it out. It's like all the hints are there. You can guess what's happened at the end. You want your reader to close their books satisfied, but wanting more. So, okay, staying motivated. I'm watching my clock too. You develop writing habits, you schedule a time on your calendar, you have a place, and you have a writing goal. Writing is a very lonely journey. It's so much is done alone. So you need a cheerleader. It's very easy to get discouraged. So find a cheerleader. You have Mary, you have a cheerleader. I had my mom. You need an accountability partner. You have a critique group. That's wonderful. And a prayer partner. All of those things are a help. Now, if someone says something negative about what you're writing, thank them. I mean, you might feel like crying. They didn't like it. But every time someone shows you that something that should be corrected in your writing, it's a gift to you, because a publisher is going to see it. Your readers are going to see it. So if somebody says, I have a problem understanding this, or could you make that a little clearer? That is a gift. It's not an insult to your writing. Take it as a blessing and don't just get discouraged and give up. Identify your opposition, because we all have opposition in writing. We have problems that we create for ourselves. We do negative self-talk, like this is too hard, I can't do this, I don't have time. We procrastinate. Sometimes scrubbing the floor looks much more enticing than sitting down to write. At least for me it was. So identify your opposition. You have people who say you're never going to get it done, you're wasting your time. I had that. And it just made me, yes, I'm going to get this done. But choose who you listen to. But if God has led you to write, then writing is your obedience to him. So you make, if God leads you to write, then this is your obedience. And Charles Finney said, when God commands you to do a thing, it is the highest possible evidence, equal to an oath, that we can do it. I think I might have put that on your handout. So take just one takeaway from today, write it down and act upon it. You know, if Kim hadn't taken that one takeaway of I'm going to meet with my mom and write down, have her answer these questions, she would not have made another step. She had to take that first step and just choose one thing that you're going to be proactive about. I'm going to do this. And Mary suggested too that to write your, well, I think it was, well, anyway, I think it was my idea. I don't remember, but anyway, to practice, to put into practice something that we've done today is write out your timeline for your salvation story. Then make your snowflake or your spider. Then do your narrative just on your salvation story. And that's giving you the practice of putting a lot of what we've done today in, you know, you're putting it into practice. And when you put something into practice, it stays with you longer. So I have one last word, and that is simply start. So you someplace start. So now if there's any questions, I've come to the end of what I was going to tell you.
Let's go ahead and go to the computer so she can hear you with a question.
I don't have a question. I have a comment.
Can you hear Sharon? Okay.
Mhm.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
This verse came to me about two weeks ago. And so it seems really apropos to what we're talking about. It's Psalm 71, 17 and 18. It says, "Oh God, you have taught me ever since I was young, and I still talk about the miracles you have done. Even when I'm old and gray, do not abandon me, oh God. Let me live to tell the people of this age what your strength has accomplished, to tell about your power to all who will come."
absolutely.
And then it's just a tad different in different translations. This is the one I liked.
That's good.
Very
Thank you.
Real good.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions or comments? That's a verse I love too.
I know it stirred up something big in me, so
What, like what?
just, because I write anyway, but it's showing me what to write in specific, because it made me think that instead of write what I was, getting from the Lord or whatever, that maybe I should have been more intentional where my thoughts and everything were at the time, before and after, as, be more intentional to talk.
Like
to
documenting events.
Right. Well, yeah, because sometimes that's part of our procrastination of writing things down and not seeing what that opposition is, choose, and then choosing who to listen to, as you said, choose who you listen to. Identify our opposition so we don't procrastinate. Anyway, it just did something because, it's just stirring something, because it's just kind of because the Lord's been doing a lot of things in my life, and some places are stopped, but other things are still moving, because you can see where God's hands in it all. And it's amazing. And so I need to be documenting those. Thank you. All good. Yes, I'm sure. Oh, she's gonna get me a tissue.
Oh.
No, I don't need one.
Oh, Stella, I also wanted just to thank you for the diagram. I've often wondered how to create a brief outline for myself to know how to share my story, the salvation story, for example. So that is helping me, because I don't want it to be a long, drawn out, boring story to my family. And yet at the same time, like you've said, and what Sharon read in the verses of scripture, we want to pass down to our children and our children's children what the Lord has done, and so that they will know him. And we know that when they know that there's a parent that's saved or a grandparent that's saved, and they know the Lord and they see the Lord in their life, or maybe they don't, but they'll read, if they read about it, it does touch them. I mean, I found a devotional, not to make a long story short, I found a devotional from my great grandparents after my mother passed away. And I was stunned. I did not know that there was any kind of biblical or Christian heritage in my family line. So that really just struck me, and it affected me for months. That, wow, this is probably where our salvation is coming from. Maybe great grandma's prayers, so it has power for our children around us. And, so thank you
Absolutely.
for sending that, showing that.
Even the pictures, I came back from Arkansas and I had a whole tub of pictures that my son had taken and kept. Well, he finally opened them up, and when he did, he got to see that he did have a good life, that there was family. By looking at those pictures, I felt that I needed to leave them no matter what was in there, so he could look through them, and when he had time, it opened up something in his heart and made him happy to see that how family was important and how he did have a good life, that he just instead of remembering all the bad. That brought that up to me when you were talking about pictures. So that blessed me there, just about it. The Holy Spirit brought that up in me.
Good.
It's very helpful.
Yeah,
Very helpful.
Thank you so much.
yeah, she's good.
I don't know if you heard Janet, Janet over here said it was very helpful.
Oh, good.
She's been jotting down her family history pages at a time and collecting pages in here and pages there. And I know she wants to create a collection, like a compilation of all those stories. And so you've empowered us now how to do that, Stella.
Oh,
And
good.
we appreciate it.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You want to lead us in a closing prayer?
Sure. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you that you love and care for each of us, even through the different journeys that you have taken us through life. Father, I thank you for giving us a heart to share with those who are coming behind us. Lord, I pray that our faithfulness to you would resonate with the next generations, and Father, that even our testimonies would be effective in ministering to them truth and the reality of who you are. I pray that as we write as the people write their testimonies, Father, that you would give them insight and just joy at all that you have done for them. We ask this in your precious name. Amen.
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 And Stella, praise God, you were able to utilize your second camera, and we praise God that it all went smoothly for you, and we are the beneficiaries of that.
Well, it was a pleasure to be a part of your group today. I thank you for that. And you are blessed to have a
Stella,
group.
thank you. Do you mind telling us how old you are?
I'm 76.
What?
She's young.
Oh my goodness, you look so, I would have guessed much younger than that. Like,
I'm getting
my
close.
age. I thought you were like,
Thank you. Thank you.
you look so good.
Oh my. Well, you know what? These cameras are pretty good then, aren't they?
All right,
Wow.
well, we appreciate it so much, more than you know, and we will talk later about what I was
Okay.
asking you about. So, okay, we'll
Okay,
take
that
care.
sounds
Stella.
good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, thank you.
Bye
It's nice to meet
bye.
all of
Give
you.
her a hand.
Thank you. Thank you, Stella.
Bye.
Bye bye.
That was a lot of